Hello everyone and welcome to the Ticker.com's news channel on YouTube. On this channel, we review stock markets and discuss financial news, market trends, and economic data from Wall Street to Global Street. So let's dive in. We begin our review of the global economy with key releases in the US, Europe, and Japan. US stock market indices struggled to advance as investors lowered and delayed interest rate cut expectations. On the economic front, several key indicators highlighted economic strength, and durable goods orders rose for the third month in a row, and business activities expanded in the previous month. On the housing front, existing home sales declined for the third month in a row. Home sales declined 1.9% from the previous month to a 4.14 million annual rate in April, up from the upwardly revised 4.22 million in March. Sales also fell by 1.9% from a year ago. The median home price increased for the 10th month in a row to $407,600, reached a record high for the month of April. Across the Atlantic, the passenger car market in the European Union expanded by 13.7%, and vehicle sales rebounded from a 5.2% decline in March, following the strength in four largest markets: Germany, France, Spain, and Italy. Battery electric car sales in April rose 14.8% to 108,000 units and held its market share steady around 12%. Consumer price inflation in the UK rose 2.3% in April, slower than 3.2% in March, and the annual inflation rate dropped to the lowest level since July 2021, after gas and electricity costs declined and recreation and cultural costs rose at a slower pace. The core rate of inflation, which excludes food and energy prices, eased to 3.9% from 4.2% in March and dropped to the lowest level since October 2021. In Asia, the Reserve Bank of India approved a whopping $25.3 billion in dividend transfer to the central government for the fiscal year that ended in March, easing pressure on the next government in financing its investment programs or lowering government borrowings. In other economic news, single-family home sales in the U.S. dropped despite the increase in home inventories. Eurozone account surplus advanced in April after goods and services surplus rose. Japan's exports and imports increased more than 8% in April, but trade balance swung to a deficit of $3 billion from a surplus of $2.5 billion. The Japanese yen averaged 151.6 against the dollar, nearly 15% lower than a year ago, drove up the cost of imports of everything from fuel to food and to raw materials for processing. Let us review key events in global bond, currency, and commodity markets last week. The yield on the 10-year U.S. Treasury hovered below 4.5% and rebounded to a one-month high after traders lowered rate cut expectations and delayed start of the timetable for December following strong economic data. Crude oil prices fell 3% to $77 a barrel after U.S. crude oil inventories rebounded and demand worries resurfaced. Natural gas prices in Europe rose 8% to €34 per megawatt hour, but eased from a rise of 11% on the persistent worries about the challenges of rebuilding stockpiles for the next winter amid rising demand from Asian markets. The euro edged higher to $1.08 after traders scaled back expectations of rate cuts and inflation worries resurfaced after negotiated wages rose 4.7% in the first quarter, nearing record levels reached in the third quarter of 2023. The yen weakened to 157 against the US dollar after the yield on Japanese government bonds rose to 1%, the highest level not seen since 2013. We now shift our attention to major stock markets in the US, Europe, and Asia. The S&P 500 index and the Nasdaq Composite halted market rallies after investors lowered rate expectations. European markets declined for the second week in a row on lowered and delayed rate cut expectations and worries of a rebound in inflation. The Nikkei 225 stock average halted a 4-week market rally after inflation, excluding food prices, rose faster than the 2% rate for the 25th month in a row, and the yield on Japanese government bond rose to an 11-year high. Hong Kong indices erased the previous week's 5% gain and trimmed this year's gain after corporate earnings growth fell short of market expectations and piecemeal policy responses. Indian market indices rebounded for the second week in a row after the Reserve Bank of India approved a bumper dividend to the central bank, easing pressure on the next government. Let us shift our attention to merger deals, market movers, and earnings update from leading companies last week. Palo Alto Networks declined 4.8% after the cybersecurity company reported better than expected quarterly earnings, but the company's guidance for the current quarter fell short of market expectation. Nvidia Corporation soared 9% after the advanced chipmaker reported better than expected quarterly results and lifted its revenue outlook for the current year, driven by strong data center revenue growth, and the company also announced 10-for-1 stock split. Lowe's companies decreased 2% after the home improvement retailer said comparable store sales declined 4.1% in the first quarter. Macy's Inc. gained after the department store chain reported better than expected quarterly results, and the retailer tightened its annual sales range and lifted its annual diluted earnings per share range. AutoZone declined 2% after the specialty retailer reported mixed results in the fiscal third quarter and said U.S. comparable same-store sales were flat. Targeted Corporation declined 9% after the retailer reported weaker than expected earnings and a decline in sales driven by weakening growth trends in discretionary item sales. Urban Outfitters rose 4% after the apparel retailer reported better than expected sales and earnings in its latest quarter. Toll Brothers decreased 0.5% after the luxury home builder's quarterly results surpassed market expectations and the company raised its full-year outlook. VF Corp dropped 9% after the apparel and footwear maker and parent company of Vans, Timberland, and The North Face reported weaker than expected revenue and unexpectedly swung to a loss. Generali decreased 3% after the Italian insurer reported a slightly weaker profitability in its property and casualty unit. In the week ahead, investors in the U.S. are looking forward to the release of Personal Consumption Expenditure Index, an alternative measure of inflation preferred by policymakers. Investors are also awaiting the release of personal income and outlays with the expectation of a slowdown from March level to 0.3%. Second estimate of GDP growth is also expected to trim the growth to 1.5% from the preliminary estimate of 1.6%. As the earnings season draws to a close, Costco Wholesale, Dell, and Salesforce are scheduled to release their earnings this week. Financial markets will be closed on Monday in observance of Memorial Day. In Europe, investors are looking forward to the release of consumer price inflation reports in the Eurozone, and annual inflation is expected to rise to 2.5% in May, and core inflation is estimated to hold steady at 2.7%. Investors are looking ahead to the release of France's jobless data and Switzerland's foreign trade balances. In Asia, retail sales, industrial production, and unemployment rate and housing starts are on tap in Japan. China is scheduled to release its official manufacturing survey and provide additional insights on how the government is planning to allocate its 1 trillion yuan stimulus to the sector's revival. India's Statistical Office is scheduled to release its gross domestic product for the first quarter. You can review daily U.S. and global financial market news, stock movers, earnings, releases, SEC filings, and economic updates on ticker.com and 123jump.com. You can find the latest financial books on dodera.com, keep up with financial industry events on eventsinamerica.com, review ETF and mutual fund performance and in-depth profiles on tickerfunds.com, and review market updates and stock movers in India on niveshak.in. That is all for today, and we will see